A 7-year-old boy ran up to me on the street, called me Mom, and begged me not to leave him again. I had never seen this child before in my life. The moment I tried to explain he had the wrong person, his father spotted us from across the street and started screaming that I was the woman who had abandoned them 3 years ago. My hands were shaking as I stared at this man's face, filled with a mixture of rage and desperate hope. He was running toward us, and I knew my life was about to change forever. What I discovered that day about my own identity shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Lydia Pemrose, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a veterinary technician here in Portland, Oregon, and I've always been the type of person who helps others without asking questions. I was adopted when I was 3 years old by two of the most loving people on earth, Camille and Braden Pemrose. They gave me everything I could have asked for, but there was always this feeling deep in my chest that something was missing. I used to have these dreams as a kid about another little girl who looked just like me, but my parents said it was just my imagination. I thought I had made peace with never knowing where I came from or if I had any biological family out there. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And the truth would find me in the most unexpected way possible on an ordinary Tuesday evening that turned into the most extraordinary night of my life. Looking back now, I realize there were signs. Little things that should have made me question everything, the way strangers would sometimes do double takes when they saw me, like they recognized me but couldn't place where from, the way I would catch glimpses of someone in my peripheral vision and turn around to find no one there. My adoptive mom once mentioned that when they found me at the children's home, I kept asking for my other me, but they thought I was just confused from the trauma. I wasn't confused. I was missing half of myself, and I didn't even know it. That Tuesday evening, walking home from work in my scrubs, tired from a long day of saving animals, I thought the hardest part of my day was behind me. I had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, a little boy would run into my life and turn everything upside down. It was one of those typical Portland evenings where the air feels crisp and clean, with that familiar scent of rain that never quite arrives. I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the downtown animal clinic, and honestly, I was exhausted. We had performed emergency surgery on a golden retriever named Charlie, who had been hit by a car, and for a while there, we weren't sure if he was going to make it, but Charlie pulled through, and seeing his tail wag when his family came to pick him up made every minute of that stressful day worth it. That's why I love what I do. Animals don't lie, they don't pretend, and when you save one, the gratitude in their eyes is something you can feel in your soul. I was still wearing my purple scrubs with little paw prints on them, the ones my adoptive mom Camille had given me for my birthday last year. She always said the pattern made me look approachable, which was important when dealing with scared pet owners. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and I probably smelled like antiseptic and dog treats, but I didn't care. I was just ready to get home to my small apartment, heat up some leftover pasta, and maybe watch a documentary about wildlife before falling asleep on my couch. The walk from the clinic to my place usually takes about 20 minutes, and I always take the same route through the Hawthorne neighborhood. It's one of those areas where families actually know their neighbors, where kids still play outside until their parents call them in for dinner, and where you can hear laughter echoing from backyards on summer evenings. Even though it was getting dark, there were still parents pushing strollers and dog walkers making their evening rounds. It felt safe, familiar, like the kind of place where nothing unexpected ever happens. I had my earbuds in, listening to a true crime podcast about cold cases. I know it sounds morbid, but there's something about those stories that fascinates me. Maybe it's because I've always wondered about my own story, my own missing pieces. The host was talking about how sometimes people can disappear completely, leaving behind no trace except the people who remember them. It made me think about my birth parents, whoever they were, and whether they ever thought about the daughter they gave up. My adoptive parents, Camille and Braden, had always been completely open about my adoption. They never tried to hide it or make it seem like something shameful. Camille works as a school librarian, and she has this gentle way of explaining complicated things that makes everything seem okay. Braden is a carpenter who builds custom furniture, and he's the kind of dad who taught me how to change a tire and fix a leaky faucet because he said every woman should know how to take care of herself. They found me at a children's home when I was 3, and they said I was this tiny, serious little girl who barely spoke, but who would spend hours organizing the toy blocks by color and size. They told me that my case file was almost empty. No information about my birth parents, no medical history, no family background, just a first name, Lydia, and an approximate birth date. The social worker said it wasn't uncommon back then for children to be surrendered with minimal paperwork, especially if the birth parents were very young or in difficult circumstances. Camille and Braden said it didn't matter to them where I came from because from the moment they met me, I was exactly where I belonged. But as I got older, especially in my teenage years, I started feeling this strange emptiness that I couldn't explain to anyone. It wasn't that I didn't love my adoptive parents or feel grateful for the life they gave me. It was more like there was a part of me that was always listening for something, waiting for something, looking for something I couldn't name. I would have these vivid dreams about playing with another little girl who had my same dark hair and brown eyes, and we would hold hands and run through fields together. When I'd wake up, I'd feel this profound sadness, like I had lost something precious. Camille used to say that some adopted children create imaginary siblings as a way of processing their early trauma, and that made sense to me intellectually. But emotionally, those dreams felt so real that sometimes I would catch myself looking for that other little girl in crowds or scanning faces on the street, searching for features that matched my own. As I walked down Willow Street that evening, passing the small playground where neighborhood kids were having one last adventure before bedtime, I had no idea that in less than 2 minutes, that little girl from my dreams was going to become real in the most shocking way possible. I was about to discover that some feelings aren't trauma responses or wishful thinking. Sometimes they're your soul recognizing what it has lost. As I rounded the corner onto Willow Street, I could hear the sounds of children playing at the small neighborhood playground. It was that magical time of evening when parents are calling out 5 more minutes and kids are trying to squeeze every last second of fun out of their day. The playground was one of those well-maintained community spaces with bright blue and yellow equipment, surrounded by oak trees that were just starting to show their fall colors. I always enjoyed walking past it because it reminded me of the simple joys in life, the kind of carefree happiness that seems to disappear as we get older. I was about to pull out my phone to check if I had any messages when I heard rapid footsteps behind me. Before I could turn around, something small and warm crashed into my legs with surprising force. I looked down to see a little boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with messy, dark brown hair and the biggest, most desperate brown eyes I had ever seen. His face was streaked with tears, and his small chest was heaving like he had been running for a long time. "Mom, please don't leave again," he sobbed, wrapping his thin arms around my waist so tightly that I could barely breathe. "I've been good. I promise I've been good. I cleaned my room and I ate all my vegetables, and I didn't fight with anyone at school." My heart immediately went out to this child, but I was completely confused. I gently placed my hands on his shoulders and tried to create a little space between us so I could look at his face properly. "Sweetheart, I think you have the wrong person," I said softly, using the same calm tone I use with frightened animals at the clinic. "I'm not your mom. My name is Lydia, and I don't have any children." But instead of letting go, the boy looked up at me with an expression that made my stomach drop. His eyes weren't just familiar in that vague way that sometimes happens with strangers. They were like looking into a mirror. The same deep brown color, the same shape, even the same little flecks of gold around the iris that I had always thought made my eyes unique. He had my chin too, with that small dimple that shows up when I'm concentrating, and his smile, even through his tears, had the same slightly crooked quality that I've always been self-conscious about. "You are my mommy," he insisted, his voice breaking. "You said you'd come back. You said you just needed some time to get better, and then you'd come back for me and Daddy. I've been waiting every day, and I knew you'd come back because you promised." Other parents at the playground were starting to stare. I could see a woman pushing her daughter on the swings who kept glancing over at us with concern. An older man walking his dog had stopped completely and was watching the interaction with a frown. I felt heat rising in my cheeks as I realized how this must look to them. A strange woman in scrubs with a crying child clinging to her, both of us clearly in distress. "Honey, what's your name?" I asked, crouching down to his level. Where's your daddy? We need to find him so he can help us figure this out. I'm Nolan, the boy said, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. And Daddy's right there. He pointed across the street, and when I looked up, I saw a man standing perfectly still on the sidewalk, staring at us with an expression I will never forget as long as I live. The man was tall and lean, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of build that suggested he worked with his hands. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, and his dark hair was slightly messy like he had been running his fingers through it. But it was his face that made my blood run cold. He wasn't looking at me with the confusion or concern I would have expected from a parent whose child had run up to a stranger. He was looking at me with recognition, with shock, with a mixture of hope and anger and desperation that was so intense I could feel it from 50 feet away. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other across that street. The man's mouth was slightly open, like he was trying to say something but couldn't find the words. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and I could see his chest rising and falling rapidly. Then, without warning, he started walking toward us. Not walking, running. "That's her!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the evening air with a raw intensity that made several people stop and turn. "That's the woman who left us." That's when I knew this wasn't a case of mistaken identity. This was something much bigger, much more complicated, and much more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The man was crossing the street now, moving with the kind of determined urgency that made my heart race. I could see the raw emotion on his face, a combination of anger, hope, and something that looked like years of accumulated pain all mixed together. Nolan was still clinging to my waist, and I could feel his small body trembling against me. Every instinct in my body was telling me to run, to get away from this situation that was spiraling completely out of control. But something deeper, something I couldn't explain, was telling me to stay. "Listen to me carefully, Nolan," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "I need you to look at my face really closely. Look at my eyes, look at my nose, look at everything. Are you absolutely 100% sure that I'm your mommy?" Nolan pulled back slightly and studied my face with the intense concentration that only children can manage. He reached up with one small finger and traced the scar above my left eyebrow, the one I got when I fell off my bike when I was 8 years old. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, like he was trying to memorize every detail. "You have the same hurt mark," he whispered, "and your eyes get crinkly in the same place when you're sad, and you smell like the soap that makes everything clean." His lower lip started to quiver again. "But your voice sounds different, softer, like you're not angry anymore." Before I could process what he meant by that, the man reached us. Up close, I could see that his face was weathered in a way that suggested he had been through something difficult. His eyes were red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping well, and there were lines around his mouth that seemed too deep for someone his age. When he looked at me, I felt like I was being examined under a microscope. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing," he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "But you can't just show up here after 3 years and act like nothing happened. Do you have any idea what you put this boy through? What you put me through?" "Sir, I think there's been a mistake," I said, standing up slowly while keeping one hand on Nolan's shoulder. "My name is Lydia Penrose. I've never seen you or your son before in my life. I think your son has confused me with someone else." The man let out a bitter laugh that had no humor in it whatsoever. "Confused you with someone else? Lady, you're standing here with the exact same face, the exact same voice, the exact same everything as the woman who walked out on us 3 years ago. You think I wouldn't recognize the mother of my child?" That's when it hit me. The dreams, the feeling of missing something, the way strangers sometimes stared at me like they knew me. My adoptive mother's comment about me asking for my other me when I was little. All those pieces suddenly started forming a picture that was so impossible, so unthinkable, that my mind initially rejected it completely. "What's her name?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "The woman who left you. What's her name?" "Celeste," he said, watching my face carefully for any reaction. "Celeste Penrose. Although I guess you probably changed your last name when you decided to disappear and start over somewhere else. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Penrose was my last name, the name my adoptive parents had given me. But I had never heard the name Celeste before in my life. And yet when he said it, something deep in my chest responded like a tuning fork being struck. "I need to sit down," I said, and it wasn't a request. My legs were suddenly feeling unsteady, and I was worried I might actually faint right there on the sidewalk. "And I need you to show me a picture of her." Of Celeste. The man, who I now realized must be Kieran, looked at me with suspicion mixed with something that might have been hope. "Why would you want to see a picture of yourself?" "Because I'm adopted," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I was adopted when I was 3 years old, and I have no memory of my biological family. If this woman looks like me, if she has the same last name as me, then maybe we're related somehow. Maybe we're sisters." Kieran stared at me for a long moment, then slowly pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking as he scrolled through his photos. "Sisters," he repeated quietly, like he was testing the word. Celeste used to have dreams about a sister. She said she always felt like half of herself was missing. When he turned the phone toward me, I thought I was looking at a photograph of myself. The photograph on Kieran's phone made my knees buckle. I grabbed onto the nearby fence post to steady myself because what I was looking at was impossible. The woman in the picture didn't just look like me. She was me. Same dark brown hair falling in waves just past her shoulders. Same deep brown eyes with those gold flecks that caught the light. Same slightly crooked smile that I had always thought made me look asymmetrical in photos. Even the small scar above her left eyebrow was in the exact same spot as mine, though hers looked slightly more faded. "This is Celeste," Kieran said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This was taken about 4 years ago, right before Nolan was born." I stared at the photo, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. The woman was wearing a blue sundress and laughing at something off camera. Her hand was resting on a very pregnant belly, and she looked happy in a way that seemed to glow from the inside out. But there was something in her eyes, even in that moment of joy, that looked familiar. It was the same expression I saw in my own mirror sometimes, that sense of searching for something, of being incomplete. "That's impossible," I breathed. "That's literally impossible." "She used to talk about dreams," Kieran continued, scrolling to another photo. "Dreams about playing with another little girl who looked exactly like her. She said they would hold hands and run through fields together, and when she woke up, she would cry because she felt like she had lost something precious." My heart stopped. Those were my dreams. Word for word, those were the exact dreams I had been having since I was a child. Dreams that my adoptive parents had dismissed as trauma responses or childhood imagination. "Show me another picture," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. Kieran swiped to a different photo, this one showing Celeste holding a newborn Nolan in a hospital bed. Even exhausted and emotional from giving birth, the resemblance was undeniable. It was like looking at myself in an alternate timeline, a life I could have lived if different choices had been made. "We were so happy then," Kieran said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was an amazing mom for the first few years. She would sing to Nolan every night, these lullabies she said she remembered from when she was little. She made up stories about magical twins who could find each other no matter how far apart they were. But then she started getting depressed, really depressed. She said she felt like she was living someone else's life, like she was supposed to be somewhere else, with someone else." Nolan, who had been quietly listening to this conversation, tugged on my scrub top. "Mommy used to cry a lot," he said in a small voice. "She would look in the mirror and talk to someone who wasn't there. She called her sister. Daddy thought she was making it up because she was sad." "I didn't know what to do," Kieran continued. "She started having panic attacks, saying she could feel someone calling for her, but she didn't know where to find them. She would wake up in the middle of the night and go outside like she was looking for something. I tried to get her help, but she said no doctor could fix what was wrong with her because the problem wasn't in her head. It was in her heart." I felt tears rolling down my cheeks, and I didn't even realize I was crying. "What happened to her? Where did she go?" Kieran's face crumpled. "One morning, about 3 years ago, I woke up and she was gone. She left a note saying she couldn't be the mother Nolan deserved because she was only half a person. She said she had to find her other half before she could be whole enough to love anyone properly. She promised she would come back when she figured out how to fix herself. "Have you heard from her since?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Nothing. Not a phone call, not a text message, not even a postcard. It's like she vanished completely. Kieran looked at me with desperate eyes. "But you're here now. You're real," which means she was right all along. She wasn't crazy or making things up. She really did have a twin sister. The weight of this revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had a sister, an identical twin sister who had been struggling with the same inexplicable emptiness that I had felt my entire life. A sister who had given birth to this beautiful little boy and then disappeared because she felt incomplete without me. "I need to find her," I said, the words coming out with absolute certainty. "We need to find her together." Kieran nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Her full name is Celeste Marie. She was born in Seattle, but we don't know much else about her early life. She was adopted too, but by a family who moved around a lot." Nolan looked up at me with those familiar brown eyes. "Are you going to help us bring Mommy home?" "Yes," I said, picking him up for the first time. "We're going to bring her home." Finding Celeste became my obsession over the next 3 weeks. I took time off work and threw myself into the search with the same determination I brought to saving animals at the clinic. Kieran and I spent hours at coffee shops with laptops, spread across tables, scrolling through social media profiles, calling rehabilitation centers, and following every lead we could find. Nolan would sit between us, coloring in his activity books while we made phone calls and searched databases. The first breakthrough came when I called my adoptive parents and told them everything. Camille started crying before I even finished the story. She admitted that when they adopted me, the social worker had mentioned there might have been another child, but the records were sealed, and they were told that sibling placements were extremely rare. Braden drove over immediately with a box of my childhood belongings that I hadn't seen in years. Inside, we found drawings I had made as a little girl, picture after picture of 2 identical stick figures holding hands, always with the same dark scribbled hair and big circular eyes. "You drew these constantly," Camille said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Every time we gave you paper and crayons, you would draw the same 2 little girls. When we asked you about them, you would say you were drawing yourself and your sister who lived far away." Kieran pulled out his phone and showed my parents photos of similar drawings that Celeste had made as a child. Her adoptive family had kept them too, thinking they were just the products of an imaginative little girl. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Same positioning, same details, even the same way we both drew tiny hearts floating above the figures' heads. The second breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I had posted on several online adoption reunion groups, sharing Celeste's photo and our story. A woman named Janet from Portland reached out to say she had been a nurse at a rehabilitation center in Seattle and remembered treating a young woman who looked exactly like me about 6 months ago. She said the woman had been quiet and kept to herself, but she distinctly remembered her talking about having dreams about a sister. Kieran and I drove to Seattle the next day. The rehabilitation center, called New Horizons Recovery, was a clean, modern facility surrounded by gardens and walking paths. The director, Dr. Martinez, was initially hesitant to share any information due to privacy laws, but when I showed him my identification and explained that Celeste was my identical twin, he made an exception. She completed our 90-day program. Dr. Martinez told us in his office. She was one of our most dedicated patients, very quiet, very focused on her recovery. She talked often about needing to get clean so she could find her way back to her family. She specifically mentioned having a son and feeling like she had failed him. My heart raced. Is she still here? Can we see her? Dr. Martinez shook his head. She graduated from our program 2 months ago, but she did leave a forwarding address. She's working at a flower shop in Bellingham and living in a small apartment above the store. The drive to Bellingham felt like the longest 2 hours of my life. Kieran was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white, and I kept checking my reflection in the passenger mirror, wondering what Celeste would think when she saw me. Would she recognize me immediately? Would she believe that I was real? The flower shop was called Blooming Hearts, and it was exactly the kind of place I would have loved to work in myself. Bright, cheerful, filled with the most beautiful arrangements I had ever seen. When we walked through the door, a bell chimed softly, and a voice from the back called out, "I'll be right with you." When Celeste emerged from the storage room, carrying a vase of white roses, time seemed to stop completely. She looked up, saw my face, and dropped the vase. It shattered on the floor, sending water and glass and flower petals everywhere, but neither of us moved to clean it up. We just stared at each other across that small shop, two identical women who had been searching for each other their entire lives. "Lydia," she whispered, and I had no idea how she knew my name. "Celeste," I replied, and suddenly we were both crying and laughing and running toward each other. When we hugged for the first time, it felt like coming home, like finding a piece of myself that had been missing for 28 years. We held each other and sobbed, and I could feel Kieran behind us crying just as hard as we were. "I dreamed about you every night," Celeste said into my hair. "I knew you were real. I knew you were out there looking for me too." The reunion wasn't perfect. Celeste had to deal with the guilt of leaving Nolan, and I had to process the reality of suddenly having a sister who needed support and understanding. But 6 months later, we're building something beautiful together. Celeste moved back to Portland and is working at my clinic now. She and Kieran are taking things slowly, rebuilding their relationship one day at a time. And Nolan has both his mother and his aunt, which he says makes him the luckiest kid in the world. I learned that family isn't just about blood or genetics. It's about showing up, staying present, and choosing to love people through their messiest, most difficult moments. Sometimes the people we're meant to find are looking for us too, and sometimes the missing pieces of ourselves are walking around in the world, just waiting for the right moment to come home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below telling me about your own experiences with family, adoption, or unexpected reunions. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that remind us we're all more connected than we think.